Thank you all so much for coming. This should be a highlight event of our semester. As always, please go ahead and fill out the QR code up front so that we can keep getting money and keep doing events like this for you guys. I'll do a quick introduction, and because this is a Q&A event, it will be quick, and then I'll let you guys hear more from our panelists themselves. Running our Q&A here, we have Professor Josh Blackman. He's a professor at the South Texas College of Law in Houston, specializing in constitutional law. And on the receiving side of the Q&A, we'll have Judge Lawrence VanDyke of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So thank you all so much for coming, and even bigger thank you to our panelists for making their way down here to Florida, and I hope you guys enjoy.
Okay. So it's a pleasure. I've known Judge VanDyke for more, maybe 10, 15 years, for a long time, and hopefully you'll know him a little bit better after this. Oh, sorry. Aha. So I've known, whoa, that's loud. I've known Judge VanDyke for probably about 15 years now. I think very highly of him, and hopefully you'll learn about him as well. So, Lawrence, good to see you.
Yep.
So let's start with your background. Born in Midland, Texas, grew up in Montana, is that right? And then you had a couple different colleges before you got to law school. Do you maybe talk about your pre-law school educational background? It's kind of a little bit unique.
Yeah. All right, well, first of all, this is the first time I've gotten to, I think, either be on a panel, certainly the first
Could
time.
that be right?
With Professor Blackman, and so it's obviously a wonderful to finally be able to do that together, and I've got to follow what he's done and the things he's stood up for in the academy, which may be one of the few places where standing up for the truth is more controversial than on the Ninth Circuit, maybe. So I really,
There's only one of you. You got a couple backups. I'm all by myself.
yeah, basically you get one per law school, I feel like.
Hi, Gary.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here with Josh, and I'll probably refer to him as Josh, and you can refer to me as Lawrence, because we've known each other. When you've known somebody since before,
That's the rule.
then everything gets kind of hard with the title. So, I grew up in Montana. I was born in Texas, which was a benefit to me when I lived in Texas for a while, because I could tell people when they say, "Are you a native Texan?" and I could say yes, even though I had left at 6 months old. But I really was a fifth generation Montana, and my dad had just moved down there briefly, and so I lived there. It came up, the fact that I was born in Texas, I later, far forward, I ran for the Montana Supreme Court, and so just the attack ads said that I basically said I was a Texan because I was born in Texas, even though I grew up in Montana. So these sort of things happen. But grew up in not a legal family, so that I think probably influences some of how I am as a judge, because I didn't grow up not a single family member that was a lawyer, and my dad had a small family health construction company. I mean, it felt kind of big to us, but did about $5-10 million a year. Again, that's probably something that's influenced my approach to the law, because maybe my healthy skepticism towards the government being able to fix things, since most of the time when the government gets involved, when you have a small business, it's not something that's helpful to you. So, grew up in Montana, went to undergrad at a small Christian school. Well, actually went to high school in Canada, a little Christian school in Canada that my parents sent me to for some years. So, and then I went to a small Christian school in Oklahoma, where I met my wonderful wife, who's not normally with me on trips like this. So she's sitting here, and so she met her, drug her back to Montana after we got married. It was 40 degrees below zero for a week, not wind chill. It was 40 degrees below zero for a week. She thought she'd died and gone to whatever the opposite of hell is. But then she fell in love with Montana, and about the time she fell in love with Montana, 7 years later, we moved, my wife and I and our 2 young children, and went off to Harvard Law School. So that's sort of the pre-law background. Didn't have any background in law. Went to law school because I took the LSAT and did well on it, and got into Harvard and thought, oh, my ticket will be punched if I go to law, which, it turns out your ticket's never punched.
No, it's not. So what was it like being at Harvard in the early 2000s as a prominent, outspoken, vocal conservative? You were, from the get-go, on your own. How was it like that?
Yeah. So it's funny. I guess I forgot to mention that in addition to getting my undergrad degree, I finished my undergrad degree at Montana State, and then I got a master's in engineering. I thought I was just going to work in my family's construction business, but I also got a theology degree, because I got very interested, and I'd grown up in a Christian home, and that's been a part of my worldview all my life, but got more interested in that, and was actually considering before I went to law school, going into full-time ministry. And part of the reason that's relevant to our talk today is that when I went off to law school, I kind of felt like I was like, picking filthy lucre over like what I maybe should be doing. So maybe to compensate for that, when I went to law school, I really wanted to make sure I didn't lose my faith. So I kind of went to law school with my guard up. Turned out that Harvard, it's changed. I have a younger brother that's much closer in age to you all. He's 24 years younger than me, and so he just went to Harvard just a few years ago. And I think before I went, and obviously when comparing notes with my brother, it was a much more challenging environment for conservatives. My brother definitely experienced that. I remember being in con law with Professor, he's passed away now, Professor Fallon. Yeah. And he was a really nice man, obviously very liberal, but there was a small cadre of FedSoc type conservatives in this law, and we were talking about Roe. I think it was the day we were talking about Roe. And the conservatives kind of carried the day. It felt like in the law school class, explaining why they didn't think this decision really was very follow the Constitution and honestly, the liberal students at the time, they just didn't speak up much. And it wasn't, obviously our class was far and away majority liberal, but they didn't say much. And we all went to lunch. I don't know why. I don't think we deliberately had lunch the day we were going to talk about Roe with Professor Fallon, but there was 4 of us that went to lunch afterwards. And I distinctly remember him saying that, if what you had said in class today, and he wasn't saying this as if he wished for the old days. He was saying if what you had said today, you had said 10 years ago, you would have gotten hissed down by that fellow student. So for whatever reason, the time I was in law school, it wasn't that it was not any less liberal, but it was definitely, they were less aggressively and sort of censoring type liberalism. I think before and after, and you actually see that, by the way, interesting phenomenon, Josh. Like on our court, if you look at the Obama appointees, which is like Judge Owens and Judge Friedland and Judge Wynn, it's not a hard and fast rule like many things in life, but there's a significant difference between the older judges that are the Clinton appointees and certainly the Reinhardts and the Carter appointees. Yeah, they're very aggressively liberal. And then you get to that phase of the Obama appointees, which is actually kind of more when it would be the people that I went to law school a little before. And they're definitely reliably liberal in their outlook, but they're just not as activist liberal, for lack of a better word. You could say a lot about. And then I think we fast forward to it feels like there's a
the Biden noms.
The Biden ones I think are more and that might be the fault of judges like Bumate and me who have been pretty aggressive on the other way.
That's great. So after law school, you did stints both in clerking with Judge Janice Rogers Brown, who I consider an American hero, and you had practice with Gibson Dunn, and I think Jim Ho was your boss at Minnie? Yep. So we talk about your segueing from law school to clerking and private practice.
Yeah, so I like I said, I had a family. Cheryl and I had 2 kids going to law school, 3 when we left. And back then, if you had a gap year and you worked in a higher paying job, like a law firm, you would get a significant bump in money, because not to get into detail, but you would go up one grade, but they would salary match, so you go all the way from, so instead of being a grade 12, step 1 or whatever, you'd be, and I'm not sure that, you'd be a grade 13, step 10. And that was about a $30,000 difference. Nice. And so they no longer do that, by the way. You'll still go up a grade, but they won't salary match unless you work for the federal government. So, and if you work for federal, you won't make much money as a baby attorney. But so for me, I sat and thought about it. I thought, I really should just work for a year, and then, it's the responsible thing to do. So I applied for a few judges. Judge Ludig, as you guys all remember, was sort of a rock star.
Oh boy, yeah.
Mr. Conservative.
It was different back then.
Yeah, he was like he fed everybody, and he was like super conservative, and we were all sad that he didn't get appointed instead of Judge Roberts.
Thank the Lord.
Yeah, exactly. Things that you realize later, and then. I applied to Judge McConnell, who I had a huge man crush on, because he's no longer a judge, but he was Mr. Church and State, and I loved his religious liberty jurisprudence. I wanted to clerk for him in the worst way. Judge Centel, but just a very few judges. Did not get any of those clerkships. was super brokenhearted, I can give, you know, if we have a Q&A from the students, I have some things I feel like I learned about the hard way in my career where I had lots of disappointments. I think that, at least from my worldview I have, which is obviously a very religious Christian worldview, I think those things were probably some of the better things that happened to me, but they didn't feel like that at the time. So I didn't get a clerkship, was on law review with all these other people that got clerkships, and went and worked for a year at Gibson Dunn, which actually I kind of recommend. That you can try before you buy sort of option of working at a firm. I don't know why, but they treat you better when they know you're leaving in a year. My brother did that also in between some clerkships, and I think you get, you know, it doesn't mean you're just to work really hard and all that, but I went back to Gibson after I clerked for Judge Brown, but I went to a different office, and that's when I was in DC, and then I went. Jim Ho was very persuasive at. Obviously not Judge Ho, he was just Jim Ho, that was just coming off of a Supreme Court clerkship, and he said, come to Texas and we'll be bigger fish in a smaller pond together, and and Cheryl, I was really torn. I definitely had Potomac fever, and I felt like everything was around DC, and but Cheryl did not want to get stuck there for our entire lives, which is a legitimate concern. My brother, I feel like that may happen to him. He's in DC now and working at a big firm, so. We went down there and worked for Jim, which was, you know, Jim is a quirky guy, but he was a great boss and very good to me, and helped me get connected with people in national FedSoc leadership. Jim was always really good about, Judge Ho was really good about saying, here's an opportunity. He was really good at figuring out what things you should do and kind of sorting through the wheat and the chaff. There's so many things you could do, and you could work your tail off. But Jim is like laser focused on the things that sort of mattered for the cause and the movement, and at the same time were helpful to me. So that was a huge blessing to me to get that. He basically bailed on me 6 months in because he got a, you know, I went down there, went to work for him, and 6 months in he comes to me and says, oh, I'm leaving to go be the Solicitor General of Texas. But then he would come back and we'd have lunch together every couple months, and then he came back to the firm and I worked for him for the last couple years.
All right, well, speaking of SG, you spent time as assistant SG in Texas, if memory serves, is that right?
Very, very brief.
How brief was it?
Like 1 month.
Was it only a month?
Yeah, so what happened? It's
Okay.
crazy.
I'm trying to figure that part out.
This kind of stuff will happen to you in your career. So so Jim says to me, you should be the Solicitor General of Montana. I was like, there's a Solicitor General of Montana in my home state. I was like, I didn't know there was a. And he goes, oh, yeah, my friend, who now is my colleague, John Stone. He said, John Stone, who was in law school class with at Chicago, is the Solicitor of Montana. And you should go do that. And I'm like, well, I don't know how I would do that exactly. I had worked at a firm for 5 years. I needed to do that in order to support the family, but I was ready to move on. They had a hiring freeze in the U.S. Attorney's offices. Everybody, and this is my point where I will pitch to you state service, which I feel like is not as necessary to convince young people to do that now, because so many federal judges have come from this, especially on the conservative side, the Republican appointee side, have come from state service. But when I got out of law school, everything was directed at federal service. You'd go be an AUSA, like what my colleague Judge Bumate did. You know, you might spend a few years at a firm, but then you'd go be an AUSA. And so I wanted to be an AUSA, stay in Dallas probably. We were very comfortable in Dallas. And they had this hiring freeze, and I could not get hired on as an AUSA. And a friend of mine said, you should go work in the Texas SG's office. They're hiring. I'm like, I don't want to move to Austin, but it was time to move on, and so I applied down there, interviewed with my old friend Andy Olams. This is funny how it's a small world. So Andy and I went to law school together. Andy interviews me along with some other folks, and they gave me. Well, Andy calls me after I interviewed and said, Lawrence, tell me about the duck incident. And I was like, the duck incident? What's he talking about? And so in their background research, Texas apparently has a really good background research thing, because nobody else that I know of ever found out about this, but I had forgotten that just before law school, I went hunting with some of my buddies, duck hunting, and they'd found this really good duck hunting spot in Montana. And I was already accepted to law school, but hadn't left yet. And they're like, hey, come hunting with us. Well, the reason it was such a good duck hunting spot was it was closed, because some New Zealand snail or something like that was that infested in this area. So we, go shoot and have great luck and, come tromping out with our ducks, and there's a Fish and Game guy standing right there, and he cites us all. And it showed up in the Bozeman, Montana Daily Chronicle section saying, they just had all the crimes, and like the first one was some sort of domestic violence, horrible facts, and then the next one is Lawrence VanDyke, and some vague thing. Well, somehow Andy's folks had found this, and so he said, so I had to defend that I had, and I've never neglected. So when I did my background stuff for a federal judge, I put on that I had shot a duck illegally. So that was my. But Andy found this, and he hired me anyway, notwithstanding my past transgression. And I went. So, but what happened was, then Jim Ho, not Judge Ho at the time, back from the SG's office, had 2 Texas Supreme Court arguments that I had helped him pretty much exclusively. It was Jim and I that had worked on the briefs, and so he said, "Why don't you stay and work for me and postpone starting at the SG's office?" Well, so what happened? This is my other piece of career advice for you. The best time to be at a law firm is when you've given them notice and you're gonna leave, but you still have like 6 months on your clock. Because like I was working like 80 hours a month or something like that, And so I was doing, because I was working for Jim on these cases, but when anybody else would say, "Hey, can you work?" I'd be like, "Well, I'm leaving in a few months." Like, "Oh, okay, well, we don't want you to put you on a case." So I'd had a lot of time on my hands. So Cheryl and I made 2 week-long trips up to Montana, and we go up to Montana, and we meet this guy who's running for the Montana AG's office. And so I kind of get the impression that he might be willing to hire me. But the problem is I've already been hired as the Texas, in the Texas SG's office. Long story short, I end up going to work on November 1st in the Texas XG's office as assistant SG. And on November 7th, they have the election. It's the same election where Obama got elected to a second term, but this Republican AG candidate gets elected as the AG of Montana. And on November 12th, he offers me to be the SG of. So I go to Andy Olam was he was the deputy SG, and then who was the SG of?
Mitchell.
Mitchell. Yeah, it was Mitchell, Jonathan Mitchell. So I didn't know Jonathan Mitchell real well. When I interviewed with Jonathan Mitchell, he had pulled an all-nighter, and he's an intense dude. Well, yeah. So I called Jonathan up because he's not in the office. I'm apologizing all over myself for saying I honestly did not know. I knew this was a possibility, but I didn't know. And he goes, "Lawrence, shut up." He says, "I believe in the free portability of labor." Like literally, that was Jonathan Mitchell.
That's what he would say. Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm not really sure what that means, but okay. So
he's the genius. So Elena Kidd called him the genius. That's what Kidd called
genius,
him.
but
he's a genius.
Really.
And he was my Habeas professor, so it's a very small world.
And he did a lot of his own work in the SG. So I go up to Montana. That's how I ended up in Montana, and that's why I only was there for. So I called Andy and said, "Can I give you 2 weeks notice? I know I've been here less than 2 weeks, but can I give you 2 weeks?" So I had a good, solid, strong month in the Texas SG's office. So.
You usually give 2 weeks notice. He worked for 2 weeks before he left the job. So
Yeah.
what was it like being so early in your career and then serving as a state SG? What was that like?
It's a fantastic job. And I used to feel like when I was a state SG going around talking to students that I had to sort of sell y'all on this idea. But it is, I can't recommend that job highly enough. Again, I was trying to get a federal job and would have gone the federal route. And later on I did work at Maine Justice in the Environment and Natural Resources Division, so I got a view of the federal, and I'll just compare state versus federal. Now I will say, if you're in the SG's office in Florida or in Texas or one of these bigger states, might be a little bit different, maybe a little closer to but my former clerk is the SG of Florida, and also one of my other former clerks is the deputy SG, and so I think that it seems like they're having a really good time and having very similar experiences. The big thing about state service that I'll tell you in the state SG's office is if you go to work in the federal government, you can have a really cool, sexy job in the federal government. You can be like an assistant SG, and you're going to argue in front of the Supreme Court all the time, and it's really cool. But regardless of what job you have, even if it's going to be very siloed, right? Like you're gonna if you're an assistant SG or even the SG, your job is basically the Supreme Court, with occasionally some other things like maybe deciding whether people can appeal, I guess. And if you're in the Environment and Natural Resources Division, really cool, big stuff, but like, not only will your job be siloed in the Environment and Natural Resources, but like my job when I was there was even siloed more than that. I was essentially doing the defensive litigation when the federal government would get sued. Whereas, like, you might have more offensive where you're suing private companies and stuff in other divisions. So that's one of the big differences is, as a state SG, especially in a smaller state, you have extreme horizontal and vertical breadth of what you do. Like I was litigating in state court all the way from, if it's a really, especially in a smaller state, if it's a really important case for your boss, they're gonna wanna have you somehow involved in that. And so all the way from the district court. So we had school choice stuff that I was involved in at the district court level. We had Second Amendment related stuff where your boss is like being attacked in the papers, like he's gonna want his or her SG on that case. And then all the way up to obviously state court, appellate court, so did a lot of arguments in the Nevada Supreme Court and the Montana Supreme Court. But then also you're gonna be litigating a lot in the federal courts, right? So that's what you don't do if you're, if you're in a federal government. And you're also and then all the way up to, I never got the golden ticket of getting to argue at the US Supreme Court, but a lot of the state SGs do, right? And I did get a lot of US Supreme Court experience in multi-state, working with, doing amicus briefs, trying to get the Supreme Court to grant cert in some of my cases, opposing cert in other cases. So you get a lot of Supreme Court experience and maybe even get to argue up there. So you just don't get that in any position in the federal government. You also, the subject matter, you don't get all subject matters. I didn't do a lot of immigration. I do a ton of immigration now as a Ninth Circuit judge, but I didn't do a lot of immigration because immigration is basically a federal, had a little bit. You don't do federal criminal stuff, obviously, but you do typically do a lot of habeas. A lot of offices will be doing, so you're in the federal courts defending state court convictions against challenges. And then everything from tax cases. And the other thing you get to work with, the other thing that's really cool about it is, and it's probably not an exhaustive list, but the other thing that's cool is you can go to DC, like my brother is in DC, and you can work with really impressive people, and that's kind of probably the best place to have a really big network of like people. But then you have to live in DC. Nobody wants to do that, right? So like
it's an actual swamp, not like this is a.
So instead, if you go and you're a state SG, or in the state SG's office, you get to live in a cool place that's not DC, and then but you still will travel, and you'll have a national network of relationships. All these state SGs, Lee Radofsky, Jordan Pratt, who's a federal district court judge here. I know him from when he was a Florida deputy SG, and I could just keep listing names, but a ton of these people I know from when we were SGs in states together. So you have that, you have all those relationships that you develop. You also end up coming to conferences a lot, like 3-4 times a year, or you'll be doing conferences with, some of the conferences will be, more partisan in the sense of like, it'll be the Republican state SGs or the Democrats, so the Democrats do that too. We didn't ever go to those, but you also will have like the National Association of Attorneys General will have sort of bipartisan, which is good, like, cause you're rubbing elbows with the Democrat SGs, which you actually share some, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, habeas you're going to feel the same way about, right? Because you don't want your state court convictions to be overturned by the federal courts, even if you're the New York or the Oregon SG. So you have some common cause. So all of that is really good experience, I think, and maybe I'm a little biased because of my background, but it's a unique experience you can't really get except for in those state SG's offices. So.
All right.
Apply now.
So you made a point before. I'd like to stress that sometimes failure and defeat is something you grow from. And I know you actually ran for the Supreme Court of Montana, which you did not get. Maybe talk about that and also how you sort of grow from an actual electoral defeat, not just like not getting a job in actual elected office.
Yeah. So I go to Montana, and I am so excited. And I'm gonna use this as a little teaching moment, if you don't mind me getting a little bit preachy. Like I thought this was the coolest job I could ever have, was to go back and be the SG in my home state. And it turned out, and without getting into details, it was a bit of a crash and burn as far as the job went. Montana now, I think, has a more aggressive sort of what you would call the stereotypical SG office. But a lot of these small states had put the label solicitor or solicitor general on an office, but they weren't really ready to give that sort of authority to that office. And so you ended up, and this is still happening a little bit today, and without going into details with some of that I'm aware of, but you end up with AGs that want to look good, but they don't want to, they want to look good, but they don't want to do the things that will, because an SG's office makes waves in your office, because the whole point of an SG's office a lot of times is to go and steal cases from your career folks, right? And they don't like that a lot of times. So some AGs don't have the gumption to actually force that, right? And so that and some other things were some challenges that that I had in Montana. So it turned out to be a pretty tough job. And I mentioned that, not like don't go to Montana. That's not the reason for mentioning that, because I mentioned that to say, I like to tell young idealistic young people like yourselves, who are all excited about your careers, you have all these aspirations, but the reality is some of you have probably experienced some failure already, right? In the sense of, you all wanted to come in and be in the top 10%, but it turns out mathematically it just doesn't probably work that way. You don't all get to like graduate at the very top of your class. You don't all, there's other things you wanted, maybe a clerkship you wanted, but you don't get. And we kind of like, we kind of have this idea that if I just was like so-and-so and you pick somebody else, then my life would be great. You know, if I just got this clerkship, or if I just got this, if I just had slightly better grades. But it turns out, just so you know, like that is not a solution. You know, from a biblical perspective, you can it's easy to see why that, you know, these are all sort of vain things. Because the reason is, if you got those things, you would just be like, if you would just wish that you had other things that were like slightly out of reach, right? Everybody I know, it's an endless escalator. And so I don't want you to take from that like, don't try to strive and get things. Like that's not from my Christian worldview perspective, my way I've learned to deal with that is that I pray about things, I pursue things, but you have to realize you're going to have failures. And I will tell you that my failures, and I just gave a talk with Judge Jordan Pratt yesterday in Stetson, and we talked about this, and he will say the same thing. And I think most people, it's your failures that you learn the most from if you don't crash and burn and like become sad and just start crying and you know give up on your legal career. So I'm telling you all this so that, you know, I think it would have been helpful when I was sitting in law school to just, if I'd known that was going to happen and that actually those things would serve a purpose in making me in my development as a person and professionally. If I'd have known that, if I'd known that losing the Montana Supreme Court race, which is what I did, you know, I left kind of a tough position in the Montana SG's office, in Montana Attorney General's office as Montana SG, and then I ran for office and I lost my election. But before I lost my election, I got sued and thrown off by the ballot by basically activist judges. And then the Montana Supreme Court sat on my having been found disqualified for 3 months during the key part of the campaign, and then like a month or so towards the end said, oh no, he's not actually disqualified. And so, as you can imagine, being disqualified for most of your campaign doesn't help you in fundraising and all that. So it was very tough, and financially, I had to hire lawyers, and it was a very personally challenging time. And then to rub salt in the wound, I was forced to basically go to Nevada to be the Nevada SG, because I could not get another job. I had this great opportunity to be the Nevada SG, but I didn't want to go to Nevada. I mean, if you'd have rank ordered the states I wanted to live in, like Nevada would have been in like the top 20%, maybe. I mean, sorry, bottom 20%. Not that I forgot I wasn't talking to Congress trying to get nominated to a seat in Nevada. It's the opposite of it. Nevada would have been like the bottom 20, the bottom 10 states or something. So, but I would not be a Ninth Circuit judge today if I hadn't gotten to that, right? Like, so I think I have a very providential view of why all that happened. It was good for my pride. It was good for a lot of things. And I ended up on the court. So I tell you all that, just obviously your path will be very different than mine, but if you know that you're gonna have challenges, and I went to what I would have thought was gonna be the coolest, best experience I could have, and probably the most challenging time in my entire career. It also, by the way, helped, some of you will know, I had a very challenging confirmation process. And having been through these other trials earlier, where people didn't like me, et cetera, really sort of helped me to where it was stressful, but it wasn't overwhelming for me when I went through. So again, be prepared for failure and don't let it like destroy you. Get back up again and realize that and I can only speak at it from a providential perspective because that's sort of my worldview, but hopefully maybe you have something like that you can rely on.
It's very true. Often when I interview people, I say, give me a time when you failed and I've grown from that. And if someone said they've never had a failure, they're not ready for the job. They're not ready yet. If you've gone through all of law school on a glide path, if you've had never a single setback, something's wrong, because maybe you're not taking the right risks.
And I wouldn't want somebody like that if I was picking judges, which I'm not. But I wouldn't want to pick somebody like that as a judge, because maybe we'll talk about this some. But you know, I want colleagues who have been, you know, had some failures, had some challenges, had some attacks, and stood against those attacks. Because even though we have life, it's a weird psychological thing. Even though we have life tenure and it's really hard to fire us, judges can be sort of like squishy and sensitive and like, oh, I don't want people to dislike me. I'm like, dude, you have like the perfect job that people dislike you. Like, it's really hard to fire you. But so 100%. And this is I wish I'd have known. This is a lesson I learned and through a lot of anxiety and challenges. But you will have things you want to attain. And so the answer is not to try to pursue those things. Pursue them. That's fine. For me, providentially, I pursue them. I pray about it. If I don't get it, then you just realize that God has a different purpose, right? That's sort of mine. But so you can pursue things really hard, but you also need to realize you're going to have failures, and when you have them, that's actually helping you. And then keep going, and you know you might, you know, you too could be a Ninth Circuit judge someday on court.
Well,
meeting your colleagues.
let's talk about that. So you go to work for Attorney General Laxalt as SG Nevada for a couple years. I think that's actually where I met you. Then you work in the early Trump administration in the Environmental and Natural Resource Division. And then you are considered for a Ninth Circuit seat. And I want you to talk about the process of both getting the nomination, part one, and part two, getting confirmed if he was not the straightest path. And I'll just give a note. He was a controversial nominee. Why? Because he did stuff. He actually took firm positions that people could judge him upon. And there was a big backlash against him. In fact, if memory serves, the Montana Supreme Court justices who screwed you over in the ballot thing wrote a letter against you. The American Bar Association, a group that I am not a fan of, did a hit job on this man. They tried to destroy him. They sent someone to interview him for like 5 seconds and ask him any questions. They wrote this report with all these anonymous, unsourced tips saying he's this awful person and he's no business being a judge. Maybe, Lawrence, talk about, again, part one, how you got the nomination from Trump, and then pivot to part two, how you navigated through the confirmation battle.
Yeah, okay. So, you know, I lose my election in Montana, and I go to Nevada with my tail between my legs, having, you know, been through some of the most difficult professional and personal times in my life, and I don't know Adam Laxalt, who was my boss at all. I'm just going down there because it's really a spot for me to go, and it's a cool position being a state SG, but didn't have high expectations, especially given what I just gone through. Turns out, super cool job. So one of the takeaways from that is just you don't know what your job, you may be going to your home state and it's going to be the coolest job, seems like a perfect setup, and turns out to be not what you expected. Then you go and you take another job, and it turns out to be, it was an amazing job. Not only, I had a guy, you know Joseph Tarkovsky? Joseph came from San Francisco and was my deputy, a rock star. So I had an amazing crew, both above and below me, the AG, the chief. So I had a fantastic experience, but unfortunately, the way these jobs work is, you know, I did 4 years, and then my boss ran for election and didn't win. So I went and worked in the federal government. My main takeaway, I again was there for basically a year, so pretty short stint. My main takeaway from that is the federal government is so big. I don't know how we can do much to change it. It's just so I did that. Did not expect, you know, I was trying to figure out whether or not we thought Bybee was going to go senior in Nevada, because we thought if Bybee was going to go senior, then my best play was to try to stay in Nevada. And I was very good friends with the new U.S. attorney because he had been my colleague in the AG's office. So we could have stayed in Nevada, but we did all the intel we could figure out, and no, Bybee's not going to go senior. So, all right, I'm going to go back, work in the administration, the Trump 1 administration, in a senior DOJ position. Do that for some years, and then who knows what I'll do after that. But presumably I'll have good credentials of having been a state SG, worked in the federal government, probably go to a big firm, which I wasn't excited about. So I go back. I'm only there for a few months, and I'm having lunch with the U.S. Attorney for Nevada, buddy mine, and he tells me, he gets a text, he's like, Bybee's going senior. And I was like, what? And so I immediately race back. So we finish lunch real quickly, and I race back, and I had some friends, including Judge Jordan Pratt was in OLP, so I'm going to go in there and be like, hey, I don't know if you heard, but Bybee's going to go senior. And maybe it's presumptuous, but it seemed like I would be at least in the running for something like that. So instead, I missed the wrong floor, if you've ever been the main justice, and I end up on OLC, not OLP, which is one is above or below the other. I can't remember which one. And nobody's around except Jen Mascot, who I knew. You guys are Judge Mascot, right? So she's there at OLC, and I'm just like ecstatic. So I go in and I'm like, Jen, Bybee's going senior. And Jen's like, what? So I tell Jen. I just remember I told Jen. I don't know why I told Jen. And then, so then fast forward, and basically, I had a lot of friends, including obviously Attorney General Laxalt and other friends that were, and I benefited from the fact that there weren't better qualified people or what. I don't know, I just had a lot of friends that were really pushing for me to, and I'm very thankful for that. And you would have to ask them, because they're a lot more politically savvy than me, and they probably think I'm kind of daft when it comes to political things. One of the funniest, I'll tell you a funny anecdote there. So Jordan, and I don't know, Jordan was in OLP, so he dealing with noms. So he would get the list of everybody that the White House would send him a list and say, these are the people we want you to start like looking in their background and see if these are. So they send a list over, and I'm on this list, but they have the rest of this. Well, I get the list from Jordan because and it turns out, and I know everybody on this list because Nevada's a fairly small state, and these are not people that are the type of people that we know. They're not the Jen Mascots and the Jim Hose and the Andy Olin and I'm like, what in the world? Like, what is going on at the White House? They don't like that they don't have, like, I'm thinking there's something wrong with the White House. So I call Adam Laxalt, my old boss, who's now in private practice, and I'm like, what's wrong with the White House that they're considering? And Adam's like, he's like, shut up, Lawrence, I gave him that list. So Adam deliberately gave him a list of people.
He stacked it.
Yeah, which I'm like, oh, that's genius. Okay, sorry, I'll hang up now.
Very daft.
So just to give you an idea, I have good friends, I think would probably be the short answer to. I have very good, smart, politically savvy friends that were supportive. And the takeaway from that for you all is be a good person and be, you know about me as probably, if you know anything, by what I write, and that I do not seem to be, I have sharp elbows on the Ninth Circuit, right? And so you would think, but that is not the entirety of what, it was only because I had a lot of people that, remember I told you earlier about if you work in a state SG's office, you'll make a lot of national contacts. So think about it, I had all these state SGs and even some state AGs and other people in DC that were willing to go to bat for me, including the SG of California, Ed Dumont, who worked for Kamala Harris, right? One lesson from that is do not compromise. There's two lessons. You do not, first of all, if you look at me, you do not need to compromise standing up for what you believe is true. I've tried to carry this with me to the Ninth Circuit. You don't be a squish just so that you can get picked for something. It won't really probably work because we're not, people, they're not looking for squishes, I don't think, on either side, right? You're just gonna get stuck in the mushy middle, right? And people actually admire people that are principled, right? They might oppose you because so A, don't be a squish, but B, treat people in your personal interactions with them, treat them with dignity, and which is what I've tried to do throughout my career. Not perfectly. I've made lots of mistakes, and I regret those more than almost anything else in my. But if you do those things, and I just ended up with a lot of really good people. And one other anecdote, my understanding is that Kate Todd. I was told that Kate Todd called Adam because I think
she was the White House counsel.
So Kate Todd was in charge of nominations right at the time. So she was trying to, and she says, she calls Adam Laxalt and she says, if I get another effing call saying that we should pick Lawrence VanDyke for the seat, I'm going to kill somebody or something like that. So I don't know who all these people were, but I'm very thankful that people were doing that, and it wasn't because 10 minutes before I started developing. This is your whole entire career. People all the way from law review in law school to, working with people in the multi-state process when you're SG.
Right, so your reputation can build up your entire life. You can throw it away in a second, a heartbeat, but it takes a lifetime to build, and you never know how it'll help you. I think Lawrence's experience shows that these calls came from people who didn't even know we're calling. Now let's pivot to the other side. People didn't want you on the Ninth Circuit. The ABA, if you didn't know this, used to have a process where they would meet with the nominees. They had this sort of like preview. It's almost ridiculous that we had this. And they interviewed Lawrence. And the person who interviewed him, if memory serves, donated to your opponent. Is that right?
Yeah.
That we call that a conflict of interest. And they put out this report on the eve of the hearing saying, not qualified, not qualified. They basically sandbagged the guy. And, there was a pretty big pushback. I wrote something, I think Adam White wrote something, the people wrote something saying, no, this is a hit. Now Trump 2.0 doesn't listen to the ABA at all. They get no preview, no meeting with the nominees. But back then, Lawrence was sort of stuck with this. Maybe talk about what it was like getting through that process and through the Senate committee. It was an emotional hearing when if I remember correctly.
Yeah, emotional is right. I cried. So that's the punchline.
You did cry.
So the ABA had this thing where they would send somebody, and it's like when you're a nominee, you always have a cadre of people that go with you too. So when I went and talked to senators, I would have 4 people, 2 from the White House, 2 from OLP. And the only time that you're alone with somebody, and I think it makes kind of sense, the reason you have people with, because somebody would say, so-and-so said X, nominee said X, and then it can, it's a he said, she said type situation. The only exception to that was when the ABA, because of longstanding tradition, they'd send somebody, and this person came to DOJ, came into my office, because that's where I was working at the time, came in, and we closed the door, and we had an hour-long meeting, and she was extremely hostile in the meeting. You could tell it was very hostile questions, and I finished the meeting and she left, and I thought, boy, that's not going to go well, because and other people, so for instance, other people, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. I think she called Andy Olom, maybe called Lee Radofsky. She called a bunch of I can't remember if Andy was a judge already. He may have been, because he was pointing for me, but. And my understanding is that she would call people, and as soon as it was clear that they were going to say good things, the call was very short, and that was my understanding. And then she obviously found some people, because you can't do what I've done without making some enemies, right? And she found a few people, and those people said bad things about me, including some people said I was lazy. Which, by the way, that part I don't really hold against people, because, as I said earlier, I work like 80 hours a week. So there are some people. This is not 80 hours a week, 80 hours a month. There's a big difference. At the last part, so there may be some partners who would just come over to Gibson's Dallas office who may have thought that was the way I worked the whole time. So whatever, I don't hold that against them. But so she did this, and so we, you're talking to the OLP people in the White House, and we said this does not look good. But we weren't surprised. We didn't think that I would probably be loved by the ABA. But then I thought, this is a Montana attorney. And given how hostile she was to me, I should just check her contribution records and see if see who she donated to, because I knew and lo and behold, she had donated to Wheat, my opponent in Montana. So I go to OLP and I'm like, hey, she donated so we just put that in our pocket. Like, we don't say anything about it, as a, and you kind of gotta wonder, are these people litigated in real life? Have they not done any OPPO research? So put in our pocket. We get a call saying, the OLP gets a call from the ABA saying, we're gonna do an adverse, that he's not qualified. And they were going to do it to where the woman that interviewed me was going to say I was qualified, and then everybody else was going to say I'm not qualified. That way, you couldn't say it was biased, right? Well, but I don't think the ABA knew that she had donated my points. So, but they waited till really close. And every other instance, this is the important thing, every other instance, the ABA, whenever they were going to rate somebody not qualified, they would send another interviewer and do another, and so to process to make sure that so they were so close we didn't think they really had time to do that. And so they call and they say, we're going to rate him not qualified, to which OLP responds, well, you realize your reviewer seems to have a clear, donated to his opponent in the Montana race, so it seems like there's a clear perception, at least, of bias here. And they just radio silence, they didn't respond. It's 7 o'clock, the day before the hearing, we still haven't heard. So we're just thinking, since they had always done another interview, there's no time left for them to do it. And at 7 o'clock, I'm riding the train back home, and they dropped this letter basically saying, VanDyke, among other, he's a horrible person. It was a really funny letter, because it says, he's not qualified, not because he's not in the sense of not qualified, you would think, but he's just such a horrible person that he's not qualified. So I don't like, like my resume was qualified, but my personality and character, I guess, was so. And the big thing they pointed to was that I had supposedly said to this woman, again, you have no, that I had told her that I could not be fair to gay people. And it's kind of a weird thing, right? Because like, you know,
Who would say that?
I'd have to be pretty dumb, right? To like, even if I thought that, like, I'd have to be pretty dumb to be like, yeah, you know. And by the way, let me tell you why I'm racist too. You know, like, it's just like nobody's gonna do that. It's just not really. I mean, it just seems, again, like, pick your battles, right? Like, so they say this, and you know, so the first question, my phone starts ringing, you know, saying, you know, and I'm getting calls from the White House, from the OLP, from friends, and like, you know, that are in the know, and they're like, what did you say that? No, I didn't say that. Like, and they said so then they're talking to the senators, I think, and so the senators are already mad at the ABA. But so I think what happened was the senators. So there's like a couple of thoughts about this. Is that one is they could have, and guys, this is a pretty. It's hard for you maybe to realize like they could have hung me out to dry. They kind of did that with who was the Oregon Ryan?
Oh, Bounds. Ryan
Bounds kind of
yeah.
got hung out to dry. Who, by all accounts, I don't know Ryan real, but he was a really good guy. Well, he gets nominated and gets attacked for something, and basically
In college, he ran some op-eds that were critical of gay rights, like Lawrence v. Texas, like 20 years ago.
So they just
College.
cut him loose, and it just, I mean, if that happens in that circumstance, if you're the person, it's really tough to, that's going to affect your career big time. So I was very aware this might happen, but you know, I had a providential view of things, and if so, you know, kind of what I told you earlier, you got to practice what you preach, right? Like so, but it was stressful, and but then I started getting word that the senators are not going to. The senators have. First of all, I think I had a lot of people that were like, this is, including Josh, and others that even knew me better. Brad Lingo, who was dean at the time of a law school, were like, I've known Lawrence since law school, and this is not the Lawrence that I know. And so they start sort of a big campaign of writing things, and then they also the senators, which was obviously key, I think decided that okay, this is our take down the ABA's involvement. And they're like, okay, so just so you know, you gotta, obviously you speak the truth, but we're telling you the question the senators are gonna wanna know is, did you say this? And they're also gonna wanna know, if you didn't say it, do you believe it? So are we close?
And we finish at 1 o'clock, right? Wow, okay. Well,
let me
finish your point, yeah, please, go ahead.
because this is really, so I go to the hearing, and then fast forward, and basically, I think it was either Cruz or Lee, and then it was Cruz or Lee. So it was Cruz and then Lee, and they asked me the same question, because it bounces back and forth. And Cheryl's sitting there right behind me, and then it gets to Holly, and Holly asked the same question. And when Holly starts asking the same question, I start to get choked up. And the media thought it was because I was so choked up because of the scurrilous accusations, and that was sort of what was sold. One side, and the other side was that, you know, basically because of the substance. But actually the reason I choked up was when you're in that hot seat and you're like literally seeing your career trying to be damaged, and then you have senators that you're starting to realize like they're trying to save me, like they're funny. It kind of gets me choked up now, but like that happened. I was like, wow. Like it's just a weird. So anyway, so I'm sitting here. This is the funny part. So I'm sitting there, and Holly asked the question. I start getting choked up, and God bless Senator Holly, because he could have like tried to save me by interrupting me, but that wouldn't. But instead he just like sat there, and I'm trying to get to where I can speak, and there's these cameras. It's a very small room, and there's these people with cameras, and they taking occasional pictures. It's pretty weird because the senators are up there, and it's a very small room, and like 3 people with cameras. And all of a sudden I start to get choked up, and all of a sudden the cameras just go like you see in like a paparazzi type thing. And I'm thinking to myself, like 2 lines of thought trying not to interrupt each other. One is like answer the question, and the other line of thought is, this is not good, like that all these cameras are going on. And so anyway, so fast forward, I answered, but the last thing I'll say is I thought the night before, as I'm trying to fall asleep, I thought, what was my real answer that I would give? Like, true serum, why do you not hate gay people? Like, you're a Christian, why do you not hate? And I thought, the real answer is because I'm a Christian, because I believe God created everybody in the image of God, and so they're all deserving of dignity and respect, even if regardless of what they're like, and that whether it's the unborn or it's a sort of fundamental Christian liberty. So that's the answer I actually gave, and I was very happy with that was the answer I gave. But I did so while crying, so that wasn't cool. So
so I have time for one more question. We haven't even touched your judicial career, so let's just summarize it. Judge VanDyke is in a court where the Second Amendment is basically dead. He had a one dissent some years ago where he counted how many times the Ninth Circuit either panel or en banc ruled against the Second Amendment. Was it 50 in a row?
It wasn't the en banc, but it was 50 times they ruled against the Second Amendment, and then at that point, every time there had been a pro, it had gone. It had been en banc.
Right. And he actually took the remarkable step of writing a panel opinion and writing another opinion reversing it, because he said, "What's the point?" Another time there was a case involving magazines, whether magazines aren't protected by the Second Amendment. So Judge VanDyke, instead of having photographs, actually included a video, which is on YouTube, had almost 500,000 views, demonstrating how magazines and other parts of guns are sights. I only have time, like a minute left. Why do you do what you do? Why can't you be a regular judge? Why do you choose to sort of take the road less traveled with these separate opinions, reversing yourself, these YouTube videos? What's motivating Lawrence VanDyke there?
Yeah, so it's a lot of work, first of all. The Ninth Circuit is clearly statistically and I think practically the busiest court of appeals in the nation. So, and I don't know about compared to some state courts, but it's a lot of work. And so just doing our day job. I remember Jim Ho, when I asked him about being the SG of Texas, I said, what's it like? He says, well, just doing the day job is 40 hours a week, and then anything you want to do, like argue cases or something, as SG is all on top of that. Well, this thing, just doing your day job is 50 hours a week, probably on the Ninth Circuit. So when Patrick Bumate and me, and I think Eric Tung and a few others, Judge Tung, are writing all these dissents from denial of rehearing en banc and doing creative things, that is a lot of work. You have to be willing to do extra work. So why do I do it? Well, I got on the court, and I had been a state SG in 2 different states in the Ninth Circuit, and most, honestly, habeas and like 1983 prisoner actions, they just did not follow the law. Like, the law is very deferential, and it's just clear that, generally speaking, in the Ninth Circuit, if the judges disagreed with what the law was, like if they thought that like the immigration laws were too restrictive, and keep in mind, like in habeas, well, first of all, I didn't have immigration. Habeas is supposed to be very deferential, but if they thought that the state court screwed up, they would just reverse them. But that's not the way EPA is supposed to work. And the same could be true of 1983. All these had a lot of deference built into them. And so I get on the Ninth Circuit, and I think I'm gonna bust some people on habeas, right? Well, it turns out, like, as our caseload, habeas just turns out to be a very small part. Like, I might have 30 cases in a week-long sitting and not even have a habeas case, or maybe have one. And the reality is they generally don't grant it. So I'm thinking I want to, like, set the tell it like it is, and I don't really have an opportunity to do that. So but immigration, which I did not have much exposure to, turned out to be, there was like 40% of our docket is immigration, and I basically had a case of transferred intent from habeas to immigration that I'm just going to do the same, and that's why I've been you didn't mention immigration, but I've been very aggressive in immigration. And
he had a concurrence. He said there's the circuit of wackadoo where no matter what happens, the alien doesn't get deported, just no matter what happens.
And basically our court just disagrees with the immigration policies that have been promulgated by Congress. Right or wrong, I don't care. I actually don't have a strong personal view about immigration stuff, but it's not my call, right? And so basically, immigration took that spot, and then I was involved with some Second Amendment stuff in the amicus, because we would file amicus briefs, and so I already had a view of the Ninth Circuit's being wrong on Second Amendment. Turned out, for some crazy reason, I just have gotten on like a crazy, statistically improbable number of Second Amendment cases. And so I just decided, Jason Muehlhoff was my second set of clerks, and he's now the senior deputy Solicitor General. Jason shows up, and Jason's first assignment, like he walks in the door, and I said, you went to Harvard, so you are liberal, so you're my counter clerk. Jason's not liberal at all, but like you're my counter clerk, so I need to write an opinion. We had to come up with this crazy idea. A lot of our ideas start as a joke. It's like, what I should do? We're like, this case is just going to get en banc. They always get en banc, and we're like, what we should do? We should just like write the en banc for them, and So I want to, you know, when you write a book, I want you to say, I deserve more credit for all the things I don't do, because we have a lot of ideas like this and we shoot them down, right? But this one, every once in a while, you're like, you should do that. And then, you know, you workshop it, and it takes months. It takes half a year from time of conception to actually, like, you know, people seeing it. But this one, we were like, we're going to do this. And it was controversial. I got a lot of pushback for it, but I decided to write a dissent, basically, and to demonstrate something. So we did that, did the video, I've done some other things. And the question is why? You know, I'm going to lose, right, on the merit. But the short answer as to why is, I think one of the challenges in our legal system as it stands today is that dissents, when you think that your colleague just in good faith got it wrong, and that happens. Like, you'll be sitting with another judge and you'll be like, yeah, actually I can see where you come here. I think mine is right and yours is wrong, but boy, you know, and that's what the founders envisioned. That's why we have all these layers of correction, all these layers and judges. But that is not always what's happening. I can tell you, I can't prove it to you because I can't read my colleagues' minds, but I'm 100% convinced that is not what's going on with the Second Amendment in the Ninth Circuit. It's not like the Ninth Circuit is just like, oh, look, good faith, you know, we can't figure out how to apply Bruin, right? That's not what's going on. And the same thing in immigration. Instead, something else is going on. And I would say they are systematically imposing their policy preferences instead of the elected branches. And when I think that's going on and happening a lot, then I want to somehow point that out. And it's kind of hard to do, because if I just dissent normally, you can't tell the difference, right? And the Supreme Court is very well behaved, and the Chief Justice is like, oh, I don't want to cast any aspersions on anybody in the federal judiciary, so they're not going to do it. So basically, I just decided I'm going to try to find ways to sort of say the emperor has no clothes about this sort of imposing your own policy preference. So that's what I've done. That's the motive behind. So it may look like I'm just doing crazy stuff, and I sort of benefit from that a little bit. I want my colleagues to think, he's crazy, what's he going to do next? You know, but I actually have a reason for what I'm doing, so I'm telling you all. So don't go become a liberal judge on Ninth Circuit and then tell them all my secrets. So anyway, then.
All right, let's take maybe a question or two, because I know we're already past time. What was a question for Judge VanDyke? Yes, right there.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's a treat. But earlier you were talking about failure and how it really helps shape your path. I'm curious how you determine when you reach failure that you think you need to push through and double down on, or when you think it's time to change your course.
Yeah, I don't know. You probably should ask my wife that, because her view would probably be like, you push through way too much. You should because she's a more, you know, I'm a type A driven type person, right? You don't usually, and so I probably tend to just keep pushing until it's a hopeless cause or something like that. So I don't know that I have a good answer for you on that. But I try to address that. A couple of things I do is I try to pray about all these things, including my cases, the challenging, you know, all these cases that are high profile that I've spent every day, basically every morning praying about. I also try to get advice from godly people that I can trust. So that's another way to try to get it. And so I don't know that you're right. I thought you were going to cite everybody. I want to, how do you know if your failure is persecution? You know, like you're suffering for righteousness' sake. You're suffering not because it's your fault, but because, you know, whatever, however you do. Or how do you know if your failure is because you're just a loser and people, you know, and I really had to encounter that when I was in the Montana SG's office, because I was having some challenges and I didn't know if it was character defects or personality defects of mine, or whether it was like people, you know, I'm getting punished because I'm a conservative lawyer coming to Montana. Because we were the first Republican AG in 20 years, so the office was pretty hostile. You run into this. And I really struggled with that. I was like, what is it? And eventually I came to the realization that, you know, I don't need to know the answer to that. It's probably some mix of that, right? I'm a very imperfect person, and I have serious personality defects that aren't immediately apparent to anybody except for Cheryl, who knows all of them, right? You know, and my clerks, right? So and so it's probably some of that, but also I do think that there was some what you might call persecution. But you can still mature from your failure, even if it's your fault or partially your fault. You know, you can go to prison for doing things, and you can become, you know, people. They don't usually, but people can. So it was actually kind of helpful to me to realize, you know what, I don't need to necessarily pinpoint all the time. It's probably helpful generally to try to figure out if the reason that you're getting failure is because of your own problems that you could fix. But from my providential perspective, I think God can use those things to shape and make me a better person, even if they are in part or in whole my own fault. Does that make sense? I don't know exactly when to quit. I wasn't like, all jokes aside, I have ideas that I don't do. And they, you know, sometimes I wish I should write a book about that when I'm done being a judge, because some of them are kind of fun. I mean, I really feel like y'all missed out. Like on the, I have ideas I don't do, but how do I decide that? I just pray a lot about it, and then like it just kind of like, and maybe then I'll have a meeting of the clerks, and I'll be like, I'm thinking about not doing this, and then like some clerk will be like, yeah, I think that's a really good idea. And you're like, where were you? Like until, you know, because the clerk's not going to be like, boss, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But as soon as you, so I don't know, it just kind of works out. But I can't give you. That is actually the hardest part of my current job. Figuring out what the right answer is on the law. There are some really difficult legal questions, but in my experience, the difficult legal questions are not the cases that you all care about, because they don't. Most of the hot button social issues, most of the, you know, the big mean guy in the White House issues that we see, all these like high profile, they're not actually very difficult legal issues in my humble experience. You do get like really, and you're like, man, I thought this case was going to be easy. It's like it's a nothing burger case, and it's got this really thorny legal issue, right? So you do have difficult legal issues, but the challenging part for me, aside from that very rare thing, is actually the prudential sort of matters of judgment, matters of wisdom, like how hard am I going to hit my colleagues on this? Because I like my colleagues. I don't want to like be making enemies of them for no reason, just be a jerk all the time. So I do like, should I go to the mat on this one? Should I light them up? Should I try to do something creative? And those are tough questions, and they don't have, you can't like crack open the Bible, you can't figure out, you know, there's no moral answer, those are actually kind of tough, but I do a lot of praying and you know, try to figure it out as best I can. And they don't happen fast. Rarely on the Ninth Circuit, like literally I'll have months and months and months. So I might have an idea I'm gonna do something and then change my mind. And nobody gets to see it. It's really sad.
All right, I think we're at time. We may have some more questions. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you, Josh.
Thank you.